The fact is that what we are facing today is bigger than protecting our children from unwanted vaccination. It's bigger than masking. It's bigger than flattening the curve. Our very way of life is under attack. So let me begin with some opening remarks. In my comments last week, I stated how some, including our own Vaccine Choice Canada members, are asking, what's the big deal? Some have asked why we don't just stick to the issue of mandatory vaccination for children, which was the basis of the founding of Vaccine Choice Canada. Following the release of the statement of claim, I've received a few emails expressing the opinion that we ought to have stayed away from the global agenda and kept our focus strictly on Canada and on the issues of masking, physical distancing, and the lockdowns. These individuals have expressed doubt that we can be successful in calling out the World Health Organization, the influence of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and the clear evidence that a coronavirus pandemic has been in the planning for more than a decade. Forgive me for repeating what I said last week, but I think it merits repeating. What I said last week was, I get why people are asking these questions and wanting us to stay in our own little arena. It's hard to see the big picture. And the implications when you do are too disturbing and too unsettling. The fact is that what we are facing today is bigger than protecting our children from unwanted vaccination. It's bigger than masking. It's bigger than flattening the curve. Our very way of life is under attack. We are being conditioned to accept the loss of our rights and freedoms and to simply go along with the dictates of authorities and the new normal. I'm of the opinion, and I suspect many of you are as well, that just going along won't serve us very well. Thinking this will all go away is both naive and dangerous. I firmly believe that things will only get worse if we let them. All we have to do is look to the number of municipalities in Ontario that have passed mandatory masking in this past week. The fact is that global agents and their co-conspirators in the mainstream media are preparing us for forced vaccination, microchipping, ID tracking, the end of privacy, and permanent restrictions to our rights and freedoms. I said last week that we're frogs in boiling water. They have cleverly turned up the heat ever so gradually, so most don't notice that the water is boiling. But we notice, we see the hidden agenda. We know our rights and freedoms are in peril. We know that it's time to rise up and stop this tyranny, this capture, this enslavement. I'm told that the Hopi people have a saying that I think is applicable to our situation. And the saying is this: he who tells the stories rules the world. We have been inundated with a narrative that declares the sudden emergence of a novel virus, of a pending pandemic that will kill millions, that we have no immunity to this virus, and that the complete lockdown and sacrifice is the only reasonable response until a vaccine is developed. It's a compelling story, but is it true? This week, in our statement of claim, we told another story. We told the story of how globalists have been planning and building a foundation for decades to dramatically change our lives and to eliminate forever our rights and freedoms. And not only have they said these things would happen, it is happening. Just ask any citizen in Ontario who is now forced to mask to purchase groceries, seek medical care, deal with their banker, or visit a loved one in a care facility. And now I want to engage with Rocco. Rocco, thank you again for joining us.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. So Rocco, I want to begin with asking you the question that I referenced in my opening comments. Why was it necessary for us to speak to the global agenda in our statement of claim?
Well, it's no more complicated than this. Let's say you were living in Kingston, Ontario, and you want to take a case of pollution with respect to the waters flowing through, and you then, or even let's say Lake Ontario, in the eastern part of Lake Ontario. You know, sure, you could do a local case against those people polluting locally in the lake, but I mean, it would be insane to say, well, why are you bringing Michigan and, you know, New York State and all the other lakes and all the other city along that same waterway that are polluting by the time it gets up to eastern Ontario, you know, or trying to deal with air pollution as strictly a local matter. Sure, you can only deal with the local matter insofar as the jurisdiction of the court, but to think that it's strictly a local matter is just delusionary. Or you take the litigation that I've done over the years over global trade deals. Well, of course, we go to court in Canada over the Canadian government's exercise or non-exercise or constitutional or non-constitutional actions. But to pretend that Canada's trade activity is in isolation to all those international treaties, again, is just delusional. We are following dictates of the World Health Organization on this so-called pandemic. How can we pretend they're not part of this? And if they are part of this, we have to know and plead, what part are they? And how do they affect our policy? How do they dictate our policy? Because we are not free from their policy in the measures taken in Canada. So why would we pretend that that dimension doesn't exist and essentially tie our left hand to the backside of our, back, hopping on one foot? I mean, that's just unrealistic, and the fact of the matter is that the evidence is there. This stuff about microchipping is there. It's represented by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They have the apps. The propagation of contact tracing and vaccine identification is part of the UN mandate. It's there. They're pushing it. It's not we are inventing it. They are putting it forward. There's evidence of that. And so the fact that we're mimicking their proposals is not irrelevant. It goes right to the center. So does the Canadian court have jurisdiction over the WHO? No, but it doesn't mean they're not part of the narrative. Because if you remove all that international dimension from the narrative, you're going to look pretty silly trying to analyze the problem from the peephole of your bathroom. Right? So it doesn't work. And it's not a proper, fulsome analysis of what's going on. So if you leave that international dimension out, you don't understand or even can ask the question of why is Trudeau giving $1 billion of our dollars to Bill Gates so Bill Gates can pursue his vaccine and vaccine microchipping agenda? That's not irrelevant. That doesn't just concern Bill Gates. That concerns Canada. Our Prime Minister has bought into it on our behalf and propagating the same agenda. And as I said to somebody who tweeted me and talked about conspiracy theories, people have to understand there's a difference between a conspiracy theory and a conspiracy under Canadian law. The notion of conspiracy theories was a device invented, propagated, and handed to the US media by the CIA in the 1960s to counteract and undermine the civil rights movement in America. So people who were advocating for civil rights and anti-discrimination and racism and everything else, including agitating against the Vietnam War, were labeled conspiracy theorists. And that was a theory and tactic that was invented by the CIA. A conspiracy theory is different from a conspiracy. A conspiracy under Canadian law is simply an agreement of two or more people to effect a certain end with the intent or with the effect of damaging somebody. If that agreement has criminal aims, it's a criminal code offense. If it doesn't have criminal aims but still hurts somebody, we have in Canadian law the tort of conspiracy. Like we have assault and we have all the negligence and everything else. There's a tort of conspiracy. If two or more people agree with legal means with the intention of causing harm, that's actionable. Or if two or more people agree with, with illegal means to cause harm, that's actionable. Or if two or more people agree with legal means where they knew or ought to have known would cause damage to somebody, that's also an actionable conspiracy in civil law. So, when somebody says, well, why did you have to raise these conspiracy theories? I'm at a loss to fully understand what the hell they mean. What do they mean? Generally, that label is when you postulate something without any factual basis whatsoever. Well, we don't postulate anything in the statement of claim without a factual basis. We plead the facts. If you read the statement of claim, we plead the facts. Not only do we plead the facts, we plead the statements by the people who are propagating this agenda, which in the context of the tort of conspiracy are statements in furtherance of the conspiracy. So if you sit down and agree to a drug deal, your statements on a wiretap are admissible as statements in furtherance of the conspiracy. So the statements that are made by, the various actors at the WHO and Bill Gates that they want to vaccinate everybody, that they want to put everybody on contract tracing, that they want to force everybody to carry an immunity passport, so you have to reveal that you got a whatever medical disorder in order to walk in to order a slice of pizza. These are statements and actions in furtherance of that agenda, if you will, to affect what we say they're affecting. I don't understand why people would have a problem with us pleading these facts, because you can't understand this global lockdown unless you understand that the agenda is global. Through the global institutions of the WHO and other UN bodies funded by these billionaire individuals and organizations. So I'm happy to take questions from people who have a problem with this pleading for that. So what I found interesting, and I predicted this to the board, the very day after CBC got served with the statement of claim, every single day for the first time in 4 months, if you've looked at the CBC website carefully, and I look at it every day, they've had for the first time articles that start poking at the official agenda. So the first day after the statement of claim, they had a story where 4 Canadian experts have written Tam and the Prime Minister and the premiers to criticize the measures and to ease the measures. 2 days ago, they had a story called Why the WHO is in the Hotspot, and they featured Trump's withdrawal of his funding to the WHO, and they explained how the WHO is supposed to work. And then they published a graph, which we plead in our statement of claim, showing who the top 10 funders of the WHO are. And then at the top, you have the United States. Second, you have and then the second and third biggest funders are Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and Gavi, another Gates Foundation, and then a couple of foundations I've never heard of, which I'm going to research. So why is it a conspiracy theory to say that Bill Gates and his cronies have an undue influence over the WHO when it's now reported fact by CBC? Because when we say it is a fact, we're conspiracy theorists. They are now the top funders. They pay the bill for WHO. What, are we naive to think if you pay the bill, you're not going to have a say or a sway in the direction of that organization? I mean, you know, if I was born yesterday, it was very early in the morning. So maybe, Ted, if people who have this concern want to pipe in and tell me what exactly that concern is. So I'm not shy to say, we're not seeking remedy from the Canadian court, except a declaration that there is this. I'm not shy to say it's a global conspiracy. And the global conspiracy is not hidden either. It's in our face. It's there to see. It's an agreement to do what they're doing. And our government is marching to that agreement. There's no question about it.
And Rocco,
in today's story in the CBC, for the first time, they ran a story, which is not news really, because this criticism has been going since day one. They ran a story of a public health officer who said, enough with the long-term care facilities, let the families in right now. They'd never run that story before in the last 4 months. They just ran the horrendous death toll, and the highest death tolls in Ontario. 40% of the residents of these long-term care facilities have died. 40%, almost half. And so for the 4 months, this is the first story I've seen on CBC where they cite an expert saying enough is enough, let people in. Now, they've been saying this all along, but they've never reported it before on CBC.
So CBC must have got a new memo this week, I would think, Rocco.
I don't know what's going on, but it's obvious to me, unless it's coincidence, that there's a late in the day attempt to cover their backside, right? But it's all, it's like with the masking, right? This is like offering a condom at the baby shower.
So Rocco, I wonder if we could just, the other question I want to ask you about is the fact that the mainstream media didn't show up for our press conference. Was that a surprise for you? It was for me.
No, it was not a surprise. Listen, in my 30-year career, you can Google. I mean, if you go to my Twitter page, there's a picture of me coming out of the Brampton courthouse on the Toronto 18 case where some CNN reporter said, congratulations, I covered O.J. Simpson, and you got more reporters here than O.J. Simpson, as if she thought I was running the trial, right? I was one of the primary defense counsel, but I didn't orchestrate the media. And whenever I called a press conference in my office over, especially in the last 20 years, I had problems fitting them into my office, and I had a large office. I've only had 2 instances where I saw a complete media blackout on my cases. The first one, which eventually slowly was broken down, was when I challenged the Bank of Canada and trying to force the government to apply the Bank of Canada statute that allows for interest-free loans for infrastructure and human capital expenditures up to 1/3 of the budget every year, which we used from 1938 to 1974. There was a media blackout on that case for the first 4.5, 5 years. Nobody touched that story until the Epoch Times broadcast it in 27 cities around the world. And then it slowly opened a crack in the other media in Canada. And the second time this has happened is with this case. And during the Bank of Canada case, when I said to people that the government does have the sway to impose a media blackout, people laughed because, Canadians, we're delusional about the country we actually think we live in. Because it may be the country of a couple of generations ago in most people's minds. People think that can happen in Canada. But think about this. There are basically 4 media conglomerates, CBC and 3 other major media conglomerates. CBC is almost virtually, apart from the advertising they get that they're allowed to do, it's funded by the government, and it's fluctuated over the years between 1.4 to $2 billion a year. The other media, major media outlets, like, all the big cable companies, CTV and that, they get their hundreds of millions of dollars in subsidies too. So if the federal government wants to put the screws on and say, you're not covering the story, they're going to listen. Otherwise, the government pulls their funding. And that's not naive. That's just reality. Because I can't fathom, I have never, apart from the Bank of Canada or this case in my entire career, never have I called a press conference without major media being there.
I thought it was pretty telling that the media didn't show up. To me, it affirmed what we've been saying, is that we're being lied to in this country. We're given a narrative, and there's not the opportunity for a different narrative to be told. I had a conversation with a fellow yesterday who is an American, and he said, in the States, he said, I get to flip between CNN and Fox News, and I get 2 different sides to a story. But he said, in Canada, what I notice is I can't flip the channels. They're all the same.
You ask yourself, okay, so you have a group with a history of litigating, or advocating for public health. You have a lawyer with a history of doing huge cases. You have the biggest, they say, crisis of the century, akin to World War II, and you have a constitutional challenge to their measures, and what? Not one single journalist is curious enough to cover the press conference? Come on, really?
To me,
so that in itself is telling.
That was deafening by itself.
Yeah.